Greetings! Thank you to everyone for coming out today for our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and non-binary authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout that will be provided in the chat and also on our website, which I'll put this link in the chat as well at strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I would also like to take a moment to thank those who have made a tip jar donation. We appreciate that so much. I'm your host today, Elaine Isaak. I also write as E.C. Ambrose. You can find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Please note that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed. Recording of electronic communications, including Zoom sessions and webinars without permission, is illegal. So today we are featuring 5 authors: K.G. Anderson, Ellen Birkett Morris, M.K. Martin, Sarah Day, and Raven Belasco. Unfortunately, one of our authors had a family issue come up and can't be here today. Hopefully, they will be able to join us at a future session. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Everybody ready? Let's go. Our first reader today is K.G. Anderson. K.G. Anderson writes short stories and edits anthologies. Many of her recent stories are near-future political fantasy, reflecting her work in tech, her Eastern European heritage, and her activism on behalf of women, elders, and universal healthcare. She helps organize the 2-Hour Transport online reader series. KG, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to appear with Strong Women, Strange Worlds. Today I'm going to read the short story Unnoticed. This story appeared originally in Factor 4 magazine, and it's in my new collection, Patty 209, which came out last month. It wasn't that people deliberately ignored me. They just didn't notice me, or half the time they thought I was somebody else. Why did you guys make me so average? My parents exchanged glances. Mom flushed, licked her lips, looked again at my father. It seemed like a good idea at the time, Mom said. She looked across the dinner table at Dad for help, and he was working as usual, scrolling on his tablet. Roger? He finally looked over at me and he sighed. Your mother and I were ignorant, he said. Wow, for once Dad was actually admitting fault. He explained that like most prospective parents, they'd met with a counselor and had their embryo's genetic material improved using robust DNA selected from databanks. We thought we were making the best choice by giving you popular, well-tested genes. We wanted you to be healthy and happy. We just wanted you to fit in. I put my elbows on the table and buried my face in my hands. I can't stand it. You made me nobody. Kate, we were immigrants. Mom leaned forward, elbows on the table, her dinner forgotten. We'd been on a waiting list to get out of Mordor for years. We knew that if we were accepted for immigration to Sylvania, we'd have only one child license. That meant only one child. So we wanted you to be perfect. But not to stand out, Dad cut in. He rationalized. We made you pretty and healthy and smart. But not so pretty or healthy or smart that the Sylvanians would be envious. Mom's voice rose, trembling. We didn't want trouble. We didn't know. Dad took Mom's hand and squeezed, probably half to comfort her and half to get her to stop babbling. It didn't occur to us that you would want in some way to be distinctive. So, I look like 5 other kids in school and I even have the same voice as 40 of them? Oh, I'd tried writing and singing and artwork, but no surprise. My so carefully selected genes made sure that I had no particular talents in any of those areas. I don't want to be nice. I don't want to be average. My voice rose into a scream, and my dad, ever the meek immigrant, looked with concern at the door of the apartment, worried that the neighbors might be listening. Hey, at least I wasn't speaking Mordorian. Maybe that was why they'd never taught it to me. We could buy you more interesting clothes, Mom said, her tone conciliatory. You could get more tattoos or dye your hair. Mom, everyone has tattoos. Everyone dyes their hair, I grumbled. I shook my head at their cluelessness, but I'd stopped shouting. Dad went back to his tablet, and Mom gave me a brave smile. Sweetheart, she said, we love you. We love you just the way you are. We ate dessert, a Savanian pechatort, because sense forbid we should eat Mardorian food. In silence, I cleared the table and Dad did the dishes. I want cosmetic surgery, I told them a few days later on my way to the curtained hallway nook that served as my bedroom. I looked straight at Dad, keeping my voice modulated and my tone reasonable. You owe it to me. I'm Mardorian. I want a Mardorian nose, and someday I'll get contacts so I can have green eyes and a treatment to have curly hair. But honey, your hair is so nice, Mom began, starting as usual with the most trivial issue. Lily, Dad cautioned her. He and Mom gave each other the look parents exchange when a child brings up a topic on which they have long held in differing opinions. She furrowed her eyebrows. He arched his. She pursed her lips. He tilted his head inquisitively. Mom raised her eyebrows, and he furrowed his, and then they both shook their heads. Dad sighed. Kate, he said, we need to explain. Yeah, you did that already. No, Mom shouted, tugging Dad's arm. Kate's not ready. Dad stepped away from her and crossed his arms over his chest. I think Kate is. I think we all are. Wait a minute. This was supposed to be about me and my miserable average life in school, but suddenly in a moment it changed. I'd never seen my father so serious. We didn't want you to look like us, to look like Mardorians, he said. Countries were closing their ports to Mardorian refugees, accusing us of war crimes. We had to bribe the peacekeepers to even get in on this resettlement list for Savania. It was the right decision, Mom said. Your father and I have suffered terrible discrimination, even here in Savania, even after changing our names to Savanian names. There is still political unrest, even though you might not hear much about it, Dad said. He dropped his voice to a whisper. Think about it, Kate. Do you have any Mardorian friends at your school? Sure, I started. Dem Baxter, but wait a minute. They were adopted by a Savanian family, and Mary Ann Thompson, but her dad's Savanian. I tried to think. There was a guy in my electronics class. Special cases, all of them, Dad said, even though I hadn't answered his question. Most Mardorian families have been settled in rural areas, and now access to those areas has been restricted. Your mother and I have friends we haven't been able to contact in several months, except by printed messages that must be sent through the government security office. Dad's face was twisted in a weak smile. For the time being, we're safe, and what's most important to us is that you're safe, always. At the hastily called school assembly 3 weeks later, the government agents passed me by. They picked out Dem Baxter and 2 classmates I didn't know, asked for their papers. Then the agents took them by the arm and led them up the aisle of the hushed auditorium. I'll never forget Dem looking back at me, searching the crowd. Almost without thinking, I threw up my hand and called out, "I!" An arm yanked me down to my seat. It was Maya. They held me tightly and hissed in my ear, "Shut up!" After the security forces van left, the teacher sent everyone back to class, as if nothing had happened. We had a quiz in math, and I couldn't write a single answer. Maya and Marianne were waiting for me after school and said they wanted to go for coffee to talk about what happened. For some reason, I couldn't reach Mom on the communicator, so they rode home with me on the Skyway. They insisted on coming up with me to our 4th-floor apartment. Embarrassed about my family's tiny unit, I suggested that I just drop off my backpack, check in with Mom, then we could all go to the coffee house on the next block. Sure, Maya said. I saw her looking over my head at Marianne. We rode up in the dingy elevator and stepped out into the dim hallway. At the end of the corridor, the door to my family's unit stood open, and not in an inviting way. My friends followed me into the apartment. It was empty. My mother was gone. Her coat and a suitcase were missing. Look for a note, Marianne said. She was sympathetic, but her tone held no surprise. We found the note under my pillow, hastily scrawled, the number of attorney and the message. Call Mr. Lampkin. He knows what to do. We made provisions for you. We love you. And I heard Mom's voice adding, we love you just the way you are.
That was definitely quite the cliffhanger, as has been noted. It was extraordinary to go from that kind of fun, kind of snarky opening to something quite different, and I would be very curious to know where the story is going. You will definitely want to follow KG Anderson. Find the link to that website in our chat. Thank you very much for that moving reading. All right, now for something perhaps quite different. Moving on to our second reader today. Our second reader is Ellen Birkett Morris. Ellen Birkett Morris's debut novel, Beware the Tall Grass, won the Donald L. Jordan Award for Literary Excellence, judged by Lan Samantha Chang. She is the author of Lost Girls short stories, winner of the Pencraft Award. Morris is a recipient of an Al Smith Fellowship for her fiction from the Kentucky Arts Council. Ellen, over to you.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you all today. I'm sharing with you a novel that was written based on an idea that I heard in the car on the radio. It was an NPR story about a University of Virginia Medical Center program that looked into young children who said they had past life memories. And so the medical center program, they would, if a kid said, I died on this day on this ship next to my friend Jack, they would go to news accounts and attempt to corroborate those facts. And so it instantly I thought, well, there's a novel idea. And 8 years later, the book was born. The book is a dual point of view novel between the character Eve, who is the mother of a young son who has memories of serving in Vietnam, and Thomas, a young man from Montana, circa 1965, who's actually serving in the war, with the question being, what is the link between those two characters? I'm going to begin with an excerpt from the Eve section, and then I'll follow with a short excerpt from Thomas's section. When my mind wandered, Dan would take my hand and say, be here now. Charlie, the son, had taken to parroting the phrase when I wasn't paying enough attention to him. If I got on the phone and he wanted to show me his race car, he would say, here now, Mommy. Whatever I was doing, I would go to him and place my forehead against his and say, here now, Charlie, and he'd return my gaze, his eyes slightly crossed with the effort. It was our thing. Connecting this way had worked to stop whining and quiet the occasional tantrum. I awoke one night to the sound of Charlie screaming and ran to his room to find him shaking and tangled in the sheets, his eyes wide. I pulled the sheets away and touched his forehead, feeling for a fever. He was cool to the touch. I pressed his abdomen to see if it was tender, but he didn't tense up. I thought back to what he'd eaten that day, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Here now, Charlie, I said, as I held him close. I looked into his eyes, but he looked right through me. I held him and rocked back and forth. Eventually, he came back to himself. His breathing evened out. He looked at me with recognition and pulled up his shirt. Bang, right here, he said, pointing to his birthmark, a small brown oval on his belly. My stomach tightened. I ran my finger across his smooth, cool stomach. Charlie didn't flinch or move. My fear turned to anger. Dan must have watched some crime show with Charlie in the room, oblivious to the effect it might have on our boy. I took a deep breath. You're okay, I said, rubbing his belly. He fell asleep in my arms, and I tucked him into bed. When I returned, Dan was propped up reading. He asked if Charlie was okay. Night terrors, I said, my voice rising. Have you been watching CSI with him in the room? God, no, nothing with violence. You sure it wasn't just a nightmare? He looked right through me. Dan leaned against me. I breathed in the clean floral scent of our shampoo in his hair. My grandfather suffered night terrors after the war. My grandmother said she would talk to him while it was happening, but it was like he couldn't see her, he said. Can fear be inherited? I asked. I don't know. It bothered me that Dan wasn't more freaked out. I'm ashamed to admit that I was secretly pleased that finally something could be pinned to his side of the family. I had always felt like the neurotic one. Dan, he pointed to the birthmark on his belly and said bang, like the sound of a gun. His brow furrowed. Did you ask him anything? No, I didn't want to fuel his fear or send him back into the night terrors. We should check with his doctor. It's probably regular kid stuff, but we want to be sure. Dan always said I worried too much, made too much of things, even before we had Charlie to worry about. It had spiraled out a few times, me feeling dismissed, Dan feeling put upon. I decided not to say anything else for now. I nodded at Dan and he settled back into bed. I lay down too, but I couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding. I checked on Charlie throughout the night, resenting Dan's snores more each time I returned to the bed. This next section is a section in the voice of Thomas, the soldier. That night, as soon as I had settled into an uneasy sleep, the rattle of machine gun fire woke me. I crouched low, positioned my gun, and listened for the commands that I hoped would come soon. Best crouched across the way, his white teeth gleaming in the moonlight. He seemed to love this shit. Carson, on my right, looked terrified. I gave him the thumbs up. Mortars fired overhead, and a blaze of light showed what looked like 2 companies of Viet Cong beyond the perimeter, barely visible in their black clothes, which our commander called their pajamas. Hot damn, whispered Best. The ground shook. We had been warned to look out for homemade grenades, one of the many ways they had to rouse us from our foxholes. I started to sweat. I found Carrie's ring in the corner of my pocket. I'm hanging on, baby, I thought. Her last letter had been 3 pages long, done in purple ink. She described the fall leaves and told me about her classes. She visited my parents weekly and they watched television together. A bullet kicked up the dirt on the bank of the foxhole. I returned fire. That drew a barrage of bullets my way. I pressed my face into the ground, kept my mind empty. The helicopters buzzed as they fired on the Viet Cong from above. I stayed down long enough for the firing to stop, smelling the dirt, feeling the bile rising in my throat, thinking a foxhole was just a grave for someone who hadn't died yet. Thank you.
Oh, Ellen, that was a fantastic reading. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. From Beware the Tall Grass. Good stuff. You can find Ellen's link to her website in the chat there to learn more about her and this great book.
I was going to mention I'm going to be giving away 3 ebook versions of the book if you sign up for that. So
excellent. So you will definitely want to fill out that giveaway form. The link was posted once. It will be posted again a little bit later on in that chat box. Make sure you fill out that form before the end. Our third reader today is M.K. Martin. M.K. Martin is a Minnesota-born Army veteran, freelance editor, and author whose work appears in her novels, literary journals, and in several anthologies. She received her MFA in Writing and Publishing from Vermont College of Fine Arts and currently lives in Ireland, where she indulges her tea obsession. Sounds good to me. MK, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for showing up. This is an abridged version of a short story that appears in the anthology, What If We Kissed While Sinking a Billion Years Yacht, which I think we would all probably be better off doing. Anyways. Okay. What's French for coyote? Candace huddled behind an abandoned gas station in the middle of East Jesus Nowhere. Probably Le Coyote, Alex said. So you're Le Coyote? Candace shifted, uncomfortably aware that she had to pee. Again. Alex shrugged. They weren't much of a talker. The faint rumble of a car engine sounded in the distance, growing steadily louder. Only 3 kinds of people use this road. Loggers and miners accessing the newly opened Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. ICE agents looking for illegals crossing the border. And illegals, like her. ICE, Alex hissed, their eyes wide, face pale. Candace shuddered. The only thing worse than having to sneak into Canada would be getting caught trying to sneak into Canada. She didn't want to imagine the kind of trouble that would cause, not just for her. We can't stay here, right? Candace looked around. Pine forest stretched away in every direction except where the ribbon of the road cut through them. Maybe they'll keep going, Alex said. But the van slowed as it approached. Of course they were going to get caught. Candace wasn't lucky. She never had been. God was punishing her for letting Gunnar do sex to her. Now her whole family would suffer. Hot tears stung her eyes. I would be better off dead. Alex grabbed Candace's hand. You're getting over the border, I promise. How? Go hide. Alex looked over their shoulder. The headlights were clearly visible. Hurry! They pushed Candace towards the dark wall of trees. She sprinted. The engine roared like a dragon, but she didn't dare look back. A car door slammed. She threw herself down like she was doing an active shooter drill at school. What are you doing out here? Barked a man's voice. Fuck off, Gestapo wannabe, Alex's voice. Sounds like resisting arrest, doesn't it, Easton? Said another man. You can't arrest me, Alex said. I'm an American. Don't look like one, said Easton. Let me see your ID. Let me see your warrant. Don't need a warrant to detain an illegal, the second man said. Get in the van. They'll sort you out in Carlton. Candace covered her ears to block the sounds of the ICE agents forcing Alex into their van. The doors slammed. The van accelerated away. Maybe if she had turned herself in, Alex wouldn't have gotten into trouble. But if she went back, she'd be sent to one of the nurturing centers for unwed mothers. After the baby was born, she would be tried for attempted murder. Her family would be ruined. The family first party would quietly shuffle her dad out of the way and scrub him off their records. No job meant no house for her family, no school for her little brother, no insulin for her mom. Candace refused to think about actually being pregnant, about actually giving birth, about how her aunt had died from complications after her cousin was born. Gunnar told her that she couldn't get pregnant her first time, and she'd believed him. She pressed her palms into her eyes and screamed silently. She didn't want to die, but if she died out here, her family would be safe as long as they never found her body. Maybe she should risk hypothermia and start walking to Canada. More headlights on the road. Was ICE coming back? The car stopped in front of the gas station. Candace? A woman's voice. Here! Candace raced towards the car. As she emerged from the forest, the driver looked around carefully. Where's Alex? ICE took them. Candace blurted out. She fell into the passenger's seat and held her freezing hands over the air vent, relishing the heat. We'll deal with that later, the driver said grimly. I'm Sophia. Let's get you to Canada. Candace wouldn't have believed that she could sleep after everything that had happened, but next thing she knew, Sophia was gently shaking her. It was early morning and the car was parked near a narrow dirt trailhead. We walk from here, said Sophia. It's not far. Where are we? Candace rubbed the crusties out of her eyes. Don't worry about that, Sophia said. Keeps us all safe, yeah? Candace nodded, remembering Alex struggling as they were jammed into the back of the ICE van. Would anyone ever hear from them again? They walked for hours through the woods, climbed over a fence, crossed a field, then walked down another dirt trail to a gravel road. A young man waited near a battered pickup truck. He nodded to Sophia and opened the door for Candace. She got in and waved to Sophia as they drove away. 2 hours later, she was at a clinic. Candace read the consent form and signed it. Then the nurse practitioner took her back to the exam room, where he did a final check to confirm how far along the pregnancy was. Less than 15 minutes later, it was done. Quick and easy. She took the pain pills they gave her. She'd had worse cramps during really bad periods. As she sat in the passenger seat of Sophia's car, watching the trees flash by, she tried to believe it was all over. She could go home, tell her parents she'd had a wonderful time at her friend's house, and life would go back to normal. As they passed the abandoned gas station, Candace sat up. She wanted to do something for Alex. They'd sacrificed a lot to help her. My dad's office coordinates with ICE, she said. If I can find out where Alex is being held, would that help them get out? It would, Sophia said. She looked at Candace thoughtfully. but you could do more if you were interested. Deep inside, Candace felt the fear that had taken root when she first stared at the little pink plus sign, transmuting into something else. Something wild. Something even dangerous. She was furious. "I'm in," she said. Okay, and thank you, everybody. And for my giveaway, if you are a writer yourself, I'm offering to give away feedback on 3 to 5 pages for editorial feedback. Thanks.
That was a fantastic reading. Thank you so much. What a very tense scene. It would be exciting to know what happens next. And now you know where to look. Also, you can find and follow MK Martin's work in the chat and in that handout. So, all right, onward to our fourth reader. Oh, and Terri is reminding us in the chat right at this very moment that you can also get closed captioning by clicking on the CC. We cannot set that up for you, but it is available in your Zoom screen. Our fourth reader today is Sarah Day. Sarah Day writes horror, science fiction, and fantasy through a feminist, queer-inflected lens. She lives in California, where she juggles writing, a day job, 2 partners, and approximately 60 noisy animals. Her dark fantasy novella, Grey Howler, came out from Underland Press in 2024. Find it anywhere fine books are sold. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'm going to hit go on my timer. And thanks in advance for your patience if I clear my throat a couple times while we're doing this. I have a summer cold and I'm just getting over it. Okay, here we go. Rhea didn't know what the letter contained, but she never knew what was in the packages she carried. And after 4 years as a courier, she had mostly trained herself out of curiosity. Confidentiality was part of what you paid for when you contracted the Three Kingdoms Courier Service to take possession of an item for you and deliver it downtown or to another province or into another kingdom or across the continent. Occasionally it was a dangerous job, but mostly it was a boring one. Lots of walking, long hours, and little company, which she preferred. Rhea was good at her job because it gave her what she wanted: solitude, mobility, self-direction, a perpetual reason to leave. It was comforting to know there was a departure at the end of every destination, curled inside it like a shoot resting inside a seed. On the evening of this 26th day of walking, a scruff of darker brown broke the tawny dust on the horizon. It grew as she approached, a cluster of shabby wooden buildings, and beyond, a sweeping curve of knobby trees that suggested a waterway. Maps of this part of the country were light on detail, but even so, she knelt in the middle of the road to spread hers out and make sure she'd read it right. A courier didn't earn her rank by having a poor sense of direction, and it's not like there were any other nearby settlements she could be mistaking for this place. But it's barely a skin tag, she thought. Surely it can't be. Sarator, the map insisted, and capped the word with a symbol that meant village or small town. Rhea looked up from the map, squinting down the road. There weren't more than a couple dozen buildings, along with a few big barns and outbuildings that were probably jointly owned and used by the whole community. Who would pay a courier's rates for a delivery to this little two-horse town? Everything was getting that honey-soaked tint that came right before sunset. The grassland around the settlement glinted, window panes flared. A warm breeze lifted off the prairie floor, carrying a voice from the village. Far away, too indistinct to really hear, a long sliding vowel, the tail end of a name, perhaps. Someone's down there at any rate. Rhea began to walk. As she walked, a dot detached itself from a dark square building out on the prairie and started down a connecting path toward the town. It grew into a recognizably human shape, a woman around Rhea's age, with a crown of light brown hair pinned up around her head, dressed in a sweeping, wide-sleeved robe. She saw Rhea coming and waited for her where the path and the road met. "You're new," she said. Her voice was as soft and light as birds lifting off the prairie floor. After weeks on the road, with only the bugs, jackrabbits, and her thoughts for company, Rhea drank in the sight of another human being like water. "Yes, hi, I'm a courier. I have a delivery." Rhea gestured at her uniform by way of explanation, but realized belatedly that a sleeveless white shirt and black trousers weren't much of a uniform. "I have my identification in my pack. I have a delivery for the mayor." "The headman," the woman corrected. "Sarator is too small for a mayor." Of course it is, she thought. "In that case, I have a delivery for the headman." "You're not coming from the Citadel, I take it? The High Priest didn't send you?" "I came from Telmont. The Citadel was 2 provinces away, leagues from here." "Why?" "Telmont, that's weeks away." The woman took a fresh look at Rhea, the sweat stains, the tousled hair, the road dust on her boots. "You came all this way on foot?" I could have come with a wagon train, but none were scheduled and I didn't want to wait." The hall wouldn't authorize a horse. Water is too unpredictable on the prairie. The woman's mouth crooked into an expression that was half smile, half wince. Tell me about it. Faced up with Rhea, the woman was a couple inches shorter, slender, with a snub nose and the deep tan and freckles of someone who worked outdoors. Sharp blue eyes, a strong mouth. The robe was fine white linen. An appliqué band of gold, russet, teal, and blue chased itself around the collar, cuffs, and hem. You're a priest, Rhea said. Nearly. I'm on my roving. In rural parts of the country, acolytes on track to becoming full priests sometimes took a year away from their home temple to travel, ministering in smaller towns and villages that didn't have temples of their own. Rhea hadn't done such a journey herself. In her experience, not many acolytes went roving anymore. There weren't enough of them to spare from the temples, and besides, among the younger generations, roving was largely seen as old-fashioned. That was the opinion Rhea had held, anyway, in the years before she uprooted her temple-bred beliefs, cast off her robes, and fled. Anyway, the headman isn't in the village right now. He left last week, he and his husband, for Colum, week west of here. West, Rhea sighed, like I haven't come far enough already. If you'd like to leave it with me, I can attest to its safe delivery. I'll give it to him as soon as he comes back. No, thanks, but I can't. The delivery instructions are clear. Into his hands, no other. The woman frowned. Well, come into town then, and we'll put you up somewhere. Rhea rolled her shoulders under the weight of her pack, feeling weeks of tension threading her muscles tightly together. The attraction of sleeping under a roof warred with her sense of propriety. I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. It would be for your safety. The woman took Rhea's wrist and tugged gently. I'm Murray. Come on. Murray led Rhea into town. The houses were all single-story, wooden construction with shingle roofs and gap-toothed front porches. As darkness fell, people threaded across the porches, either going in from a day of work or coming out into the cooler evening air. Lanterns dotted the windows. There was a hum of barely audible conversation. A dry, incessant cough came from inside one of the houses. Rhea watched the people move, mesmerized by their presence after weeks on the road. She expected to feel some conversation, because in a town this size, any new arrival would generate interest, but no one spoke to her. Sarator seemed subdued, wrung out. No temple? She asked, more to break the quiet than out of any real curiosity. I'm afraid not, Murray said. This far out, they get by with traveling priests. Someone passes through twice, maybe 3 times a year. They walked through a sea of darkness punctuated by buoys of light from the windows. Rhea noticed there were fewer lights than there were houses. Where are all the... Rhea started to say, but Murray pointed down the road. A gleam of orange light flickered in the grassland beyond the town. There's a group coming off the prairie, she said quietly. They're on the other side of the spring. She strode into the darkness. Rhea hesitated, but when Murray didn't look back, inertia and curiosity pulled her forward. Beyond the shelter of the houses, a smooth breeze cut across the earth, pulling all the tall grass in one direction. A group of people advanced in from the grasslands, led by an elderly man holding a lantern. The group looked footsore and grimy, like they'd been out in the sun all day. Good evening, Murray. Hello, Cref. Murray stepped forward, her hands folded in the sleeves of her robe. Did you find anything? The lantern holder shook his head wearily. Nothing. We're back out tomorrow. Murray nodded, an expression of practiced concern on her face. You're all in my prayers. From the street behind her, Rhea heard someone break into tears. She turned and saw a woman standing on her porch, face in her hands. A man rubbed her back. The group continued around the spring and passed Rhea and Murray. What are they? Rhea started to ask, but Murray shook her head. Several men in the group were staring. Hostility emanated like heat waves. Belatedly, Rhea realized they were staring at her. Not too trusting of strangers around here, Murray murmured once they were out of earshot. They seem trusting of you, Rhea pointed out. The other woman flashed a weary smile. I'm not a stranger anymore. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
That was very intriguing. We are all drawn in and now a little bit nervous as well. How many people will go out at night tonight? But perhaps first, you should read Grey Howler. Learn more at saraday.org. And now I can introduce our final reader for today. Our final reader is Raven Belasco. Raven Belasco writes the Blood and Ancient Scrolls series, whose vampire characters have a rapidly growing dedicated fan base. Prior to writing novels, her articles and short fiction have been published for over 20 years. With a lifetime of nerd and goth cred, she also loves walking her small, scruffy terrier. All right, let's hear it from Raven.
I'm just jumping right in. We are heading out to the main action in Blood Eternal. Sandu played up his attempts to calm the man as they moved to the Land Rover. Bagamil and I coming up quietly behind. The guy was so busy venting his wrath at Sandhu that he never noticed. The man stopped short when we got to his car and looked around puzzled. Eh? Where's the car? I can see nout. Sandhu slid into his personal space, forcing the man to meet his eyes as he told him, "The car was totaled. There was no one there to explain it. There was nothing you could do. You will catch a cab home tonight. You will not call the police. You will buy another car. Do you understand?" The last was said with great intensity, as if the words were being bored into the man's mind. "All right, mate. Repeat it back to me. The car was totaled." As Sandhu worked the man through the mesmerism, I watched in fascination. I'd never seen Sandhu do his thing, not like this. Most times when he spoke with Key, they just gave him what he wanted. I couldn't usually tell if he was using low-level entrancement, or if that was actually the privilege that came with being a handsome European man who, as actual royalty, was used to getting his will without hesitation. But this was different, not low-level, not at all. I could feel a throbbing at the edge of my brain, and if I could feel it, I couldn't imagine what that guy was experiencing. It must be a bit like drowning. He repeated it back, his voice dull and slow, but certain. Damn it! That meant Sandhu didn't lie about not mesmerizing me. I'd almost counted on Sandhu having made me make those rash decisions in that long-ago weekend that changed my life. In all the times I'd been abducted and stuck around waiting to be rescued ever since, I'd always come to a moment where I'd ask myself how I've gotten here, and replaying the past, I'd concluded that Sandhu must have enthralled me and made me do things contrary to my core self. Nope, it was all me. Fuck. Well, maybe he was low-level persuasive, but it was mostly me. I had been so recklessly horny and idiotically thrilled to discover vampires were real that I'd gone and joined the dark side without a second thought. It couldn't be the dark side. We were the good guys. Well, that was a fun internal debate for another day. For now, Mr. Former Land Rover owner was done being bound to Sandhu's will, and he toddled off toward the high street and his interrupted dinner without a backward look. Sandhu stood smiling at us, dangling the key fob. "I have acquired a suitable vehicle. Shall we go?" The fob chirped and the doors unlocked. Damn, he can be smooth when he likes. Bastard. There was no way I ever could have turned him down. Bastard. And then we were rolling through the English countryside, and I had the window down to smell the cool night air full of autumnal decay, the occasional harsh sweetness of manure, and the smell of peaty water as we crossed bridges. Bagamil had the map open on his phone as we drove toward Croglan Grange, 30 miles until the bad idea became a bad reality. After Carlisle, the houses and buildings were spaced farther apart until we came to a roundabout. Sandhu was driving our fancy-pants Jeep as though we were totally comfortable with driving on the wrong side of the road. Once we got to that roundabout, however, even with the few cars that were in it at that time of night, the experience was almost worse than the remembered terror of thinking Sandhu and I would be painfully drained of blood by Julio's minions, while Bagamil was being used as the Amber version of a chocolate fountain for the rest of his pitiful existence. Those fears were only a few weeks in my past, yet the experience of going the wrong way in a chaotic circle of cars merging to and from any and all directions was almost as terrifying. I white-knuckled it until we finally exited on the A69 in the direction of something called Aglionby. A bit later, we crossed Warwick Bridge and proceeded through a town delightfully called Little Corby. Another waft of that peaty water perfume showed we were near something called Cairnbeck. Soon after that, signs promised Castle Carrick, and eventually we did pass, in the distance, a real, true castle, its towers lit up against the night sky. As an American, this was a pure shivery delight for me, and I wished that instead of driving toward the bad plan, we could go in a different direction, both figuratively and literally, and throw ourselves into doing the tourist thing. I hadn't collected myself from that before we passed Tottergill Farm, then a place called Cymru. This was far out from the city. It was all farms on hillsides and little villages tucked into valleys. I'd never been any place like it in the world. It felt like every story I'd read about England was true, even Lord of the Rings, potentially. and we would unquestionably come across hedgehogs dancing in a circle in the moonlight round the next bend. And there were a lot of bends. The road kept getting narrower, sinking down into the landscape. I realized with a start that carriages had been cutting into the dirt on this path since before Alfred the Conqueror. Before the ancient Romans built a wall, somewhere around, well, here. In some sheltered places, trees grew over the road in an arch so that the moonlight filtered down between the branches. I wanted to ask Sandhu to slow down, not only so I could enjoy the view better, but because the few times we passed other cars, I felt certain there was not enough room for us both, and one of us would end up crashing into the hedge. Because there were hedges, actual hedgerows. They looked satisfyingly like you'd expect a hedge to look, except you probably hadn't been expecting to be nearly driving into them at regular intervals. It was not what I had envisioned while reading cozy murder mysteries in my American bed in the evenings, back in my old life where adventure was comfortably within the pages of a book, and not most of my waking moments. I wished fervently that this upcoming encounter would be with a deeply introverted recluse who just wanted to donate some books to my library and talk to us about Amur history. That this time we could interact with a fellow Amur without knives or guns or flamethrowers coming into it. That no one would try to end Sandhu's and Baghamil's long existences or my potential one. Just a social call, and then we could rest up for a while in this an amazing part of the world and go for long night walks in these hills, breathing the remarkably refreshing air, and visiting castles and stately houses. And pubs! The thought of a warm pub with a fire in the fireplace and a glass of single malt whiskey and a big plate of food that would include chips made my tummy growl again. What's going on with me? It couldn't be stress. I'd had plenty of that in the recent past without being famished. For key food, that is. Better not to contemplate my increasing need for blood as sustenance as well. I'd never been so hungry in my life. Any life. After we passed a place improbably called Newbegin, Sandhu slowed, so I was able to hear the burbling sound as well as smell the water as we crossed a small river that was signposted as Croglin Water. Holy shit, we must be getting close now. I leaned in, looked at the map app, and saw the destination only a short line away above a stream called Briggle Beck in an area of green labeled Bank Wood. We took a sharp right into a very bumpy, potholed driveway and drove down a long drive lined with trees that made me very glad I had almost Amur vision, because I wanted to see what we were coming up on, the infamous Croglin Grange. And I will be, I made it through, but I will be giving away 3 ebook versions of Blood Eternal in the giveaway. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your fascinating world. That was a wonderful little ride, and I'm sure people are excited to find out what happens at the end of that road. Good stuff. And thank you so much to all of our fabulous audience members. We really appreciate you coming out today to join us for our reading.